Here's Eileen Myles.
Like writing. I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything. But that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right.
What a poem. We're going to hear it again.
Writing. I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything. But that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right.
Let's start with the opening two lines. It's the opening 4 lines. I can connect any two things. Erica Kaufman, I can connect any two things. That's quite a statement. What's the tone of the statement? What do you think she's saying?
I think the tone is playful, and I kind of think that she's referring back to the title of the poem and how one of the amazing things about writing is that when you're writing, you're also thinking and you're discovering. So if you're writing, you can connect anything, and you don't always know that until it actually happens.
So writing as distinct from other human activities, like working with your hands in a physical world, you can't connect any two things. But in writing, you can. Can you say the obvious? What is it about writing that allows you to connect any two things? And what's the power of connection? I'm going to ask Erica that question and then also ask Max to add whatever he thinks.
Well, I mean, writing is you're putting words down on paper, and when things are next to each other, one might say that they're connected. Just purely the act of putting things into language is building connections. And connections is how we make sense of the world and how people think and relate to each other.
Mm-hmm. Max, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I think it's important that it's any two things, right? I mean, that speaks to the power of it, that you can take things that have no obvious relation and create the connection. And so I think that's really kind of underscoring the importance of connection or connectivity, or things that are things joining up somewhere in some kind of middle space. I also just love the line break too, right? I can break any two things, and then sort of the connection is that break, is the space between these two lines, or these two mini stanzas.
Oh, that's really great. Lily, I can connect any two things. That's God. What's God-like about connecting any two things?
I think that she could be advocating for a kind of like, first it's godlike in the sense that she is the one who is creating the connections. So there's an element of creation and an element of all-knowingness, because she is the one who both knows and then creates what that connection is. Mm-hmm. But I think also there's a little bit of an element of like, there's a spirituality to writing that may not be connected to like a particular religion, but like there is a godliness maybe, or like a spirituality in that act of connecting two things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's keep going with the poem. So once she's sort of made this humble brag and said, that's God, which I find to be a very powerful statement. It's like saying, that's nirvana, that's bliss, that's power, that's amazing. Then we get into this very seemingly domestic scene. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. So we don't have to build a narrative, Anna, about this story. We don't have to do it. Yeah. But we kind of imagine that the poet or the speaker there's maybe a little cut or something, and she runs to the bathroom to see what's going on. Yeah? Okay. And then sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. She's kind of moving on. Do you want to say anything about that passage?
I think what's so awesome, the awesome kind of power of this poem for me, is the fact that because she starts off with, I can connect any two things, and then does it, we completely remove like how well she connects those things from the equation. Yeah. It's not actually about like the value of like, well, did she actually connect these two things that well? That's no longer part of it. So like you said, we can build a narrative out of this. She's thinking I can connect any two things, like, here's a Band-Aid on my face. I don't want to see my face. Sometimes I think I look okay.
Yeah.
the meat of the poem where the sort of like things are happening, where she's moving, where she's looking at her face, where she's got this little folded piece of Band-Aid, it's almost like filler just to remind us that she can connect any two things, and that's what she's doing. That's what this is.
And
about.
she's enacting the I can connect any two things. She's actually doing it right here for us. All right, so Greg Wass in the Facebook group writes, writing poetry is about the act of making connections and creating a reality. Indeed, the essence of creativity is making unexpected connections. I'm reminded of what Wallace Stevens said, after one has abandoned a belief in God, poetry is the essence which takes its place as life's redemption. The act of poetry is a sacred process, even in the small details of the world, such as a Band-Aid. And Jeremy Dixon, hello, Jeremy. Or is God a teeny piece of Band-Aid sticking two things together?
I just like what Jeremy said about God being the teeny piece of Band-Aid, or like, I think also he's just kind of picking up on the interesting juxtaposition between something really big and magnanimous and huge like God, counterposed with something like a teeny piece of Band-Aid, which is just like, I think of it as just like detritus that would be in like your purse or your pocket or something. But I think like, to me, this poem is kind of this, even though we said we don't have to read a narrative into it, I think of it as like being out somewhere or being somewhere and feeling a little bit anxious, because you definitely see the growing anxiety with the sometimes
Yeah, checking your
stanzas.
face in the mirror is typically, at least for me, a very anxious activity.
Yeah, and so I think of like, something when you are feeling anxious, like finding something that grounds you. And so I think for her, she's kind of like finds this teeny piece of Band-Aid, and it reminds her all over again, like, I might be losing control, or I might not know what's going on, or I might be, my head might be reeling, and I can't stop my face from appearing in the mirror when I look into it, but I've got this like process that grounds me of connecting things like Band-Aid's book and God.
Okay, so sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror, anxiety. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts, greater anxiety. Sometimes I can't do anything. So basically, her anxiety has caused her to be paralyzed. But that's okay. So let's look at but that's okay. Emily, be as simple, Emily and then Max, as simple as you can in that turn. Describe that turn, but that's okay. What's okay?
It seems that condition of anxious shame is okay, that humility is okay. It's also the humility that comes directly on the heels of this assertion, I can connect any two things. The humility is what leads her to this act of divine creation as she sees it.
Cool. Max, any thoughts on, but that's okay?
I mean, it's that classic sort of meta paradox that we encounter again and again, right? Where she says, "I can't do anything," right, as after she's done a lot of stuff, right? So it's humility, but it's also maybe tongue in cheek. It's sort of knowing, and I mean, it makes me think a little bit about the difference, reading this poem on the page versus hearing it out loud. Like, she blasts through when she reads it. You don't get the sense that anything is slowing her down. You don't get the sense that she is sort of like humbling herself in that moment. Whereas on the page, yeah, it is a little bit of a slower trickle. I think it's just one of those classic like meta paradoxes that we've seen.
My sort of intuition is that we've got, she builds up, sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Like you said, anxiety, greatest anxiety. She builds up like 1, 2, 3. And then right before you feel like you're about to go over this edge of like, existential crisis, we get, that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I can do this. I've connected Band-Aid, this thing I was talking about before.
Yeah.
God, I was talking about before, through book, which is what she's produced, right?
Yeah.
Books of poems. Eileen she's published like 19 books of poems or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's this. That's right.
And that's right is so powerful.
Yeah.
Chris Wastaza has joined the table. Hello, Chris. So what I'd like to do is go around and get really quick final words on this poem by Eileen Myles called Writing, a meta poem, and say anything that needs to be said. Emily, you're first. Final thought.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that's right, and that is a kind of perfect, two things that she's connected, and a perfect way of concluding this poem, and that it's a part of the poem, but it's also looking back and reflecting on her poem. That's right. The thing that's right is this particular poem that she's written, and this poetics, this kind of mission statement of hers as a poet, and and it really dovetails with the way we talk about poetry generally in this class.
Cool. Anna, final thoughts?
It doesn't seem like it goes anywhere, and yet it goes so many places. Reminds me of Emily Dickinson kind of in that way. We don't actually travel beyond the bounds of these lines, and yet we've got these, incredible vacillations in, the sort of pride and playfulness at the beginning to the huge anxiety of the middle to the kind of sigh of relief at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I love this poem.
Very cool. Chris Mostaza, final thought?
I like to think of the I as the reader of the poem too, in addition to the poet, because after you read the poem and you move through the disjuncture, you say to yourself, "Wait a minute, I can connect any two things."
And we have to, and we have to. Really well said, Dave Poplar. Final thoughts?
I see this poem as a big grouping of pairs, and obviously I was primed to see that from the beginning. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything. Those things are pairs. And I like how that leads to, but that's okay. And then at the very end, that's right. It's as if she's saying,
that's
all
right.
these things that may not be connected are connected. I can connect them.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right. I think we can read "That's Right" in so many ways, Dave. And one is just a slap to the forehead. Oh, wait a minute. I could click my heels 3 times anywhere and go back to the home of the poem. Like I had it in my power all along. And
Exactly.
anxiety turns out to be a kind of gateway. Jake Marmer, final thoughts on this?
I don't think it's a definition poem, meaning here's what I think writing is. I think it's very much a process poem, and maybe because, we've been throwing around the word improvisation a lot, it feels to me like she sat down and the process was happening. I can't connect any two things. Here's me sitting down to write, and in the moment of writing, here's how it unfolds.
Yeah.
In other words, she didn't set out to define what writing is. She sat down to write.
She sat down to write. We had Eileen Myles here this spring, and one of the things I think we all realized was she stood for this idea that when you sit down to write a poem about content, you might be able to do it, or you might not. But if you sit down to write, you will be able to do it, because the worst, and indeed the best, is to be able to write about the fact that you're having anxiety about writing, and then you've written, and that's right. That's all you need. And that's not only the power of improvisation, but the power of believing in yoking dissimilar things and producing a third thing which is not the same as those two things. And that is the result of that improvisation. And Chris Mostaza is right. We have to actually figure out, okay, Band-Aid book, what's the connection there? Oh, we've done it. We do it too. Okay, Max McKenna, final thoughts.
It reminds me of the Wheelbarrow poem by Williams a lot because of the way it looks, but also because of what it's doing. I don't think that it's quite this. I don't think that's quite a poem of accretion. It's not these clauses depending on each other, but rather it's something more lateral. But the idea is the same. I think that she's kind of putting things together. Maybe not in such a clear vertical way, but more horizontal way. Although the shape of the poem on the page would lead you to think that it's sort of vertical.
Well put. Before we turn to Erica for final word, just to cite some people on the Facebook page. Mariah Zilberberg writes, as Joan Didion says, and I paraphrase, I write to find out what I'm thinking. And Dave Poplar's mom, Eleanor, writes, I agree with Max. You notice she didn't say I agree with Dave. I agree with Max. The poet's speaking this poem produces a different result than the reading of it. She performs with a sort of cockiness, knowing she can get through the day. Yeah. She has the godlike power of creation after all. Erica, final thoughts?
I love this poem so much, and it feels very much like a manifesto poem to me, but not just a manifesto about writing. It reminds me of like the things that I wish I could actually remember to say when I'm working with teachers or when I'm working with my own students, which is that you have to just let yourself make the connections that you make as a reader or a writer.
Yeah.
Or as a reader of poetry, you can't necessarily go in thinking
Right.
that there's one exact meaning. You have to open
Right.
yourself to the different connections that you make through the act of engaging with the poem.
That is such a great way to end this conversation about this poem, and I think it is. This poem has the potential to be one of those anthemic ModPo poems, a poem that really tells us a lot about what we do and what we stand for.